Politically correct policing has left black neighborhoods.
Politically correct How does Vanderbilt employ a fucking history professor who walks around referring to something as politically correct policing? What's up, everybody? Welcome back to YouTube's hottest political game show, PragerU. You've got to be kidding me. The rules are simple. Each of the numbers on this dartboard are assigned to a different PragerU video. I throw some darty boys at this darty board and watch and respond to whichever PragerU videos the dart happens to land on. Make sense? Well, it should. I'm dumb and I came up with this. So anyways, let's get to it. Oh, shit. Oh, so close. Jesus. Oh, you fucker. Oh, number one. All right, everyone, the darts have spoken. The topic of today's video is a two-parter. PragerU released two videos in tandems about the history of the Democratic Party and the history of the Republican Party, so I guess we've got a double feature today. With that out of the way, let's send it on over to Reaction Room, Piley. Take it away, dude. Thanks a lot, Dartboard Piley. So yeah, for today we're gonna be looking at two PragerU videos, The Inconvenient Truth About the Republican Party and The Inconvenient Truth About the Democratic Party.
Racist, sexist, Republican, these words are virtually interchangeable.
True!
Let's take a look at history. The Republican Party was created in 1854.
Which of course means the politics of its foundation are super duper relevant. They have in fact never changed. Nothing has happened in the past 170 years. In fact, I don't know if you knew that. Also, some fun research I found, it turns out the early Republican Party platforms were super pro-immigration. So I would love to see folks like Carol over here claiming that the Republican Party has been the party of mass immigration and that that's a good thing, actually. I wonder how that would go over with their base. Oh wait, what's that? Party platforms change over the years? Weird. Who could have guessed that the party platform from 1854 wouldn't perfectly resemble nowadays? Weird.
The Civil War that followed was the bloodiest war in U.S. history. It led to the passage by Republicans of the 13th Amendment, which freed the slaves.
Unless, of course, you happen to be in prison, then slavery is perfectly legal thanks to the 13th Amendment. I'm sure nothing bad will ever come from how this piece of legislation was written. Trust me on that one.
Every black representative in the House until 1935 was a Republican, and every black senator until 1979 was too. The first female member of Congress was a Republican. The first Hispanic governor and senator were Republicans. The first Asian senator, you get the idea.
What exactly happened after the first time all of these things were achieved? Which party now, the relevant time, as opposed to the fucking 1800s, which party do these folks generally go toward?
Dwight Eisenhower, who sent the 101st Airborne Division to escort black students into Little Rock Central High.
I thought you guys were the party of states' rights. That's a weird contradiction there. I wonder if something between the fucking 1950s and now is some sort of ideological or perhaps, if you will, demographic shift led folks to appeal to the interests of states' rights racist Southerners. I wonder if that becomes a contentious point in history at all.
When Arkansas Governor Orville Forbes,
this motherfucker's name just sounds racist, right?
The Civil Rights Act of 1960 was filibustered by 18 Democrats for 125 hours.
Weird, it's almost like it kinda sucks that we have a system where barely a fifth of the elected representatives in the Senate can just sit there and stall necessary legislation for so long. Maybe we should get rid of that, Carol. I like where you're thinking.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964 That, too, survived a filibuster by Democrats.
Notice how with the bill from 1960, she brings up that there was no Republican opposition to the bill, but then suddenly when we get to 1964, all of a sudden you get a handful of Republican senators voting against it. It's almost like the tides in those short few years there were starting to turn if people were starting to read the tea leaves a little bit and change their minds about what kind of demographics they're supporting.
What have Republicans done for women and blacks lately? The answer you'd hear from professors, journalists, and celebrities is not much. And this time they'd be right.
Holy shit,
They'd be
she
right
said,
because
holy shit, she said the quiet part out loud. Oh my God, that's amazing.
Today's Democrats treat blacks and women as victims who aren't capable of succeeding on their own.
Aren't capable of succeeding on their own is a really weird way to phrase the system isn't letting them. Like, I would love Carol over here to tell me why it is that there's the massive levels of inequality that we have. Is it just that people are making awful decisions and actually it's just all their fault and that's why, you know, the wealth gap hasn't changed since the 60s and all that? It's a position of not wanting to do anything to like actually change the inequality.
So there is a party with a long history of racism and sexism.
Long history of. I don't care what the Republican Party platform was back in fucking 1954. I care about who's fighting for who today. There's no transitive property to being in a always evolving political party. Anyways, it is now on to the second video.
Since its founding in 1829, the Democratic Party...
Oh yes, very relevant period of the party platform from 1829. Ah yes, I too, when I roll up to the polling station, I really look for what the party's platform was back in the Andrew Jackson administration.
The Democratic Party founded the Ku Klux Klan, imposed segregation, perpetrated lynchings, and fought against the Civil Rights Acts of the 1950s and 1960s.
This single little graphic here carries with it so many sleights of hand, I simply cannot sit here and let it go unchecked. First of all, I think it's really important to note that a concerning number of things on this list are now defended or excused in some way by the grand old party. It's Republican strongholds where you find Confederate flags. We just fucking had a president try to stall military budgets. Imagine that, a Republican blocking the military budget because they threatened to rename some of the bases that for some dumb reason were still named after Confederates. And as far as lynchings are concerned, I direct you to the fact that it is Republican opposition as of the year of our Lord 2020 that kept a lynching bill from passing. It's also really ahistorical to act like the only places where segregation happened were those stinky Democratic southern states. Plenty of northern cities had awful, despicable segregation as well. Not to mention the fact that Oregon and Maine were pretty specifically founded as a haven for white people. Some of the worst, like, targeted segregationist policies were in fucking Oregon, and that was a Republican stronghold. So it's really ahistorical to just blame this all here.
And they imposed poll taxes and literacy tests used to subvert black citizens' right to vote.
Yet in the relevant era of politics, which is to say today, it's Republicans who are making voting harder or restricting voting access. Like, for example, an attempted North Carolina law that a court ruled targeted black people with surgical precision in the choice of ID that was necessary for voting, or when Republican states try to make an ID with an address required for voting, which kind of inherently disenfranchises the right of Native Americans. But of course, she'll never bring those up because it's Team Red, you see, and Team Red can never do any wrong in her eyes.
President Woodrow Wilson shared many views with the Klan.
Gonna take a moment here to give a quick fuck you to Woodrow Wilson, you white supremacist piece of shit.
And when all of their efforts to enslave blacks, keep them enslaved, and then keep them from voting had failed, the Democrats came up with a new strategy. If black people are going to vote, they might as well vote for Democrats.
That is such a disingenuous way to talk about changing voting demographics. They don't just say, yeah, you black people, you're voting for us now. Like they made shit happen. As much as President Lincoln fought to make the 13th Amendment happen, LBJ fought to make the Civil Rights Act happen. Like, he didn't just declare black people vote for him. It was an intentional choice to appeal to the changing tides in America. Like, I love how it's almost like she's saying that if you were ever the party of supporting bad things, you gotta stick to that, and any attempt to change yourself as a party is evil for some reason.
Massive government welfare has
Okay, stupid welfare queen conversation aside, it's really interesting that she started the sentence saying, it's the policies of Democrats that are responsible. To which I would respond, yes, it's the policies of pre-civil rights Democrats that are responsible. You know, the way that Federal Housing Administration favored white clients, or general post-World War II policies favored white clients over black people. That has massive impacts on how wealth is distributed between populations and generation to generation. That absolutely contributes to where we're at today. But she can't say that, because to argue that it's the issues pre-civil rights that are screwing people over, she would then have to be in favor of things like reparations. She would have to be in favor of economic redistribution if she admitted that those policies are responsible. But she's a real hardline player for Team Red, so she's got to make it about how trying to take action to make inequality less present is actually the real inequality maker.
politically correct policing has left black neighborhoods.
Politically correct How does Vanderbilt employ a fucking history professor who walks around referring to something as politically correct policing? Lady, we've had nothing but the war on crime for the better part of the post-civil rights era. All the inner cities that you would probably be referring to have the most fucking policing. There's no absence of policing there. So yeah, as I expected, unlike the Robert E. Lee Statues PragerU video, this video is a lot less point-by-point inaccuracies and more so just broad strokes inaccuracies. Like, she's not necessarily lying here. It's just lying by omission and a weird ahistorical framing of everything. But my whole counter argument to this lady can really be summed up in 7 words. What have you done for me lately? Like, I am extremely unconcerned with what some rando back in 1923 had to say about stuff. I care about what people are supporting nowadays. I think it's purely a fool's errand to judge parties based off of what they did upwards of 100 years ago, because shit is just so weird. Shit changes so much. Like, I was reading some of the things that split Republicans and Democrats in the late 19th century, and it's shit like the gold standard versus the silver standard, or being a Protestant versus being a Catholic, and like so many things that are just completely irrelevant to us these days. It feels like such a weird project to base your support for a political party behind what they did when my great-great-great-great-great-grandma was around, you know? This weird obsession with like a through line of political parties' history feels like it can only play defense for bigoted people or get in the way of progress under the guise of, well, this party used to do something different, so stop asking questions about what we're up to now. But to get back to my 7-word hot take, she completely steps over the modern era. Like, she spends all this time with the graphics about how many people voted for this or how many people voted for that. Yet she doesn't seem to have a single word for what people have done lately. Like, she doesn't pull up, for example, the 2 congressional votes on making Martin Luther King Jr. Day a national holiday. Why doesn't she bring those up? Oh, would you look at that? It's because it had massive Republican opposition, which stalled it from happening. A mere 15 years after the Civil Rights Act, when supposedly Republicans were this stalwart defender of civil rights, all of a sudden they can't even do the simple little virtue signaling thing of recognizing Martin Luther King with a national holiday. Now, of course, she is ignoring important votes like this throughout history because she wants to ignore the way that party values have switched over the years in order to play defense for her otherwise bigoted political ideology. But let's ask, did the parties switch? Now, I'm struggling at the moment to remember who said this. It was either Matt Karp or Adolph Reed or Torrey Reed or Harvey K. Somebody on the Michael Brooks show pointed out that it's not quite accurate to say that the parties switched, more that it is accurate to say almost like little amorphous blobby boys trying to absorb different demographics over time, that eventually demographics shifted around to the point that eventually the kinds of people who were voting for segregationists back in the 60s are now electing Republicans. It also just blatantly ignores the 1964 election, in which almost every state whose senators voted strictly to deny the Civil Rights Act of 1964 all conveniently voted for the Republican that time, which for some of those states was the first time in a while. Weird how that would work out. What could have caused that to happen? This is the scary Team Blue. Why would they vote for Team Red? Well, it's because fucking Goldwater over here saw the changing tides of the party in power making civil rights happen, and he tried to campaign on states' rights. He himself being one of the few Republicans who voted against the Civil Rights Act, and it seems that that energy carried the Republican Party going forward. It also just generally washes over the racist side of her precious party. Like, yes, a marginally higher percentage of Republicans than Democrats voted for the Civil Rights Act in 1964. But you know who was in opposition to the Civil Rights Act in 1964? Pretty soon to be President George W. Bush. Even with this 80% figure here, that still leaves 20% that were staunchly opposed to it. It's impossible to separate those histories, and to try to just wash that under the rug is really disingenuous and is just kind of blatantly trying to protect her precious Team Red. But more than anything else, what's so funny, and really this should be this should key you into how she really has no water to stand on with her argument. As soon as it gets to the modern era, as soon as the question, what have they done for me lately, comes up, she no longer has these fancy little graphics. She no longer has a history of who's electing people into Congress to pull on. She all of a sudden just has to pontificate about victim culture. Why is that? Because by the by, it is now the other side that is fought for civil rights. It is the other side at the moment, pushing for stronger voting rights. It is often Republicans looking to restrict voting rights. That's what they've done lately. After losing these demographic votes in the 1960s, they have lately tried to restrict those demographics from voting or make it harder for those demographics to vote. But she can't talk about what's happened lately because it's pretty clear. So she just has to pontificate about victimhood culture. That's all her fucking argument boils down to at this point. And again, her argument just pretty massively ignores the faults of America as a whole when it comes to things like civil rights and tries to pin it on a singular party. So again, this argument isn't so much a lie, so much as just like missing a lot of context in a way that is really important to fucking make sure to mention when you're talking about these issues. And it is the absence of that information, not the inaccuracies of the provided information, that really make this fall apart when you put it under a microscope and give it any ounce of scrutiny. But yeah, that's about it for this video, so let's turn it on over to End Screen Piley. Take it away, End Screen Piley. Thanks, Reaction Room Piley, and thank you for watching, everyone. Shout out to all my lovely, definitely not racist patrons, like those whose names are currently on screen. On top of generously supporting me, patrons get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content and early versions of every single one of my videos. We're also coming up on a patron-exclusive Q&A video, so make sure to join me on Patreon if you want to ask me some Q's and have me respond with some A's. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to toss me one of them likes and subscribe down below. Make sure to ring that little bell and set the notifications to all so you can know the exact nanosecond I release my next video. Make sure to share this video on whichever social medias you frequent. It really helps the channel out, and I greatly appreciate it. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter, where I'll make sure to call out any ahistorical nonsense like this. Thanks much, and I'll see you next time.